Hey there guys, welcome to another episode of the MH Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Miles Harrison, and today guys, we're going to get straight into it. We're going to be talking about plyometrics, why to use them, when to use them, how to use them. So by the end of this episode guys, you have a good structure and a good introduction into plyometrics and then applying them into your own training. So let's get straight into this and all that. So the whole thing with plyometrics is they allow you to train your body to produce force quickly and efficiently. This is by using something that's called the stretch-shortening cycle, and that technically basically means that when you obviously landing on the ground, the muscle, the tendon stretch quickly under eccentric force, it stores its elastic energy, then releases it quickly. You can think about, I don't want to say a rubber band, that's not really the right one, more like hydraulics, where it stores energy as it compresses and then releases energy as it opens up. But on the way around, add the eccentric loading. That eccentric loading goes through the contractions to shorten, and then away you go. So I think about thing. Now, why do we need to use plyometrics, especially if you're in the realms of sports and you're doing athletes? So if you think about plyometrics, these usually improve things of jumping, sprinting, acceleration, change of direction, power output, landing mechanics. I've got my notes here. This is why I'm reading it off so very well. But stiffness, reactiveness, all these things are really important to the game. And especially if you're playing most team sports, you are doing these things like short acceleration. You've got your decelerations there. You've got your jumps. You've got your headers. You've got tacklings. You've got so many variables that relies your body to move quickly and needs a high amount of force very quickly. And that's the good thing about plyometrics. They have a control environment to teach you how to absorb force and produce force quickly. That really you can't create just through strength training alone. Now we're going to start off with the biggest mistakes that most people make when it comes to starting with plyometrics. And most people, when they start off to doing some form of plyometrics, they usually go to the big, the intensive plyometrics. We're talking things like depth jumps, we're thinking triple jumps, things that quickly demand a lot of eccentric force. And that can have a lot of toll on the body. We even know that even low level of jogging, and you can argue that jogging is a form of plyometrics, can carry up to 3 to 4 times your body weight in milliseconds, which is obviously a lot of force very quickly. And when people should start off with, and when people really start off with plyometrics, like everything, you shouldn't just go straight to what potentially could be the most maximizing way of doing plyometrics. But you need to start off small. You need to build some capacity into it, build a skill of doing it. Yes, there is a skill component in doing plyometrics, like everything. And then once you have that, you can start ramping up the intensity and also the volume as well. So I'm going to give you guys a nice progression model when it comes to starting off with plyometrics. And the first stage of it is landing. In order to produce force, you need to be able to absorb force quickly. We always start with the eccentric component of the actual jump itself. So what's that going to look at? We could do things like stick landing. So you could do a simple case of you're going on your tiptoes, a little bit of a hop, and then you try to stick that landing. Really landing on that kind of mid-foot to heel, that kind of deceleration component as well. Allowing yourself to stay tall and not to crumble underneath any type of force of kind of landing. Now, you could do these kind of low-level ways and stuff like that. But once you start feeling comfortable in the fact that you can decelerate your body weight quite quickly, and you can even do this in the form of some exercises. You could do something like a drop squat or something like that, and just get used to just like decelerating your whole body weight. And then obviously from there, what you're trying to look at, or when you know this is a good point to move on, is can you do that quietly? Can you be able to land on the ground, not with a massive thump, but also just like softly land on the ground with the level of stiffness as well? And the next point now, guys, is obviously talking about things like low-level extensive plyometrics. So there's two levels Two types really of plyometrics, the main ones. You've got extensive plyometrics, and this is what we're going to be going into now, and intensive plyometrics, and they're more, as the name implies, quite intensive. They are really take a toll on the body. But going back onto the low level stuff, these kind of like plyometrics, we're looking at things like building rhythm, stiffness, and tissue tolerance. We're looking at being able to ability to repeatedly be able to absorb force and produce force in a slightly less manner, still quite amount in a short space of time. But all of this is, again, just to build capacity and build tolerance to the tissues that are going to be taking on these loads. And the most thing about plyometrics, they're very like tendon heavy, and tendons don't adapt as quickly as muscles do. They do adapt in quite a period of time. Obviously, it depends on what you're doing for it, but it's not something that we're just going to be able to throw a big dose at you at, because you are going to start feeling things like tendinopathy and all that type of stuff. So when it comes to applying this kind of stuff into your training, you want to sprinkle it in and see how you respond to it. And if you find that you're responding well to it, then now a little bit more. As you apply a little bit more and you're feeling really good for it, then you can start applying more intensive stuff as well. But with these are going to be things like pogo jumps, hops, skipping, ankling drills, A skips, B skips, really kind of low level bouncing where it is almost like you're just trying to be a little bit springy on maybe those ankles and those knees. You're able to stay quite relaxed into it as well. They're quick and they contract, got good rhythm with it, and they're not really like maximal effort at all. So again, thinking about building that kind of a base with these as well. Once you go into that, you can start looking into doing kind of bilateral jumps. Now, box jumps themselves are not a plyometric because they don't have that landing phase before they go into the jumping phase as well. Where box jumps come really good into it is more that kind of that rate of force development, where we're trying to produce force really quickly. But it's really good for building confidence into that stage, and then obviously as you land into the box, building that confidence in that landing stage. But bilateral jumping, from a standpoint of repeated jumping, is actually a plyometrics. So we call this a counter movement jump, where you got your hands in the hips, you can actually have your arms moving as well, but you're just bouncing. Again, you're getting a little bit more knee, a little bit more hip in there as well, a little bit more intensive, but you could do something like 3 rounds of 3 jumps of repeated jumps. And the idea of it is that you're able, again, it's that springy component. It's being able to comfortably and confidently, quickly get on the ground and then bounce up into the air again without losing a lot of that shape in the lower half, but also as well in the upper half. If you're kind of jumping in your heads all over the place and you don't really particularly have a great deal of control. And obviously with all this stuff, yes, we want to be explosive, we want to be powerful, but we don't want you to just do it for the sake of it. You're not just throwing everything about. You're having a good amount of acceleration through this as well. And even a good level of acceleration, we're needing that kind of level of control as well. From there, we can start moving on to not just simply vertical jumps, but now bringing a level of horizontal and lateral plyometrics in there as well. So these things can be like your broad jumps, your bounds, lateral bounds, skater squats, diagonal jumps, things now where we're starting to add multi-directional work in there as well. So you can see from there is that the progression itself not only is the intensity of the jump as well, but also the demand of the task in hand. And when you start adding different planes of motion there, when we start adding things like side-to-side jumping as well, we can see how quickly that can take a toll on our body. So, and also as well, if we think about kind of like sports as well, a lot of sports doesn't just mean that you're jumping from forwards to backwards. Obviously, you're going to take things from different angles. You're going to be jumping diagonally. We're going to be jumping forwards and then backwards, and we can turn and we can twist in. We've got a lot of these components that we really need for the sports, and that's why it's important to make sure that we are getting those things through plyometric training. And that kind of leads into the next part, that progression as well, is doing some form of reactive plyometrics. And when I say reactive plyometrics as well, usually you might have someone who's maybe got like a ball, like a tennis ball or something like that as well. You're doing some hops and then he asks you to go into a different direction to go and catch that ball. That is reactiveness. That is actually true agility work as well. Because like I mentioned before, when we are doing sporting activities as well, we're not just simply just jumping into space. We're usually responding to something. So if it's football, usually we're responding to how the ball moves as well. Maybe how our opponent is trying to take us on or we're trying to take them on. We have all these different levels of tasks that we're trying to do in maybe a step, a couple of steps to change the direction, that we need to make sure that, first of all, we can handle the force that are applying to us. And then from there, we can then absorb that force to be able to produce that type of force as well. And from obviously these as well, you can switch it about from obviously bilateral work, so 2 legs to single leg. Now, there's another level of complexity that involves when obviously you employ of single leg stuff. And these are things like your depth jumps, your single leg depth jumps, high hurdle jumps, max boundings as well. These are very intensive plyometrics. So we don't need a great deal of volume with them, as we might want to do when we're doing extensive plyometrics as well. But the idea of these is very similar to sprint training. Is they're very high intensive. We're trying to do them to a really good level of skill. Once that level of skill is starting to reduce or we can't get that same output, it's probably better off to not do them in that kind of sense, because not that there's a sense of injuries and stuff, but like sprinting, you need to have that high output. If you don't have that high output, you're pretty much doing the conditioning. And there's nothing wrong with building a base to us as well. But the idea of intensive plyometrics is to be able to produce a max amount of force in a short space of time. That's the whole point of them as well. And obviously, as you can imagine with these, the cost of doing these requires more recovery. And if you're someone who's in season, obviously what we're trying to do is try to do a high level of work, but we're trying to minimize the fatigue that we're trying to get from it, because that's going to then start leaking into our training sessions, our matches, which obviously we don't really want to do that much about. So we got to be careful with not only the dose that we're doing in that session, but the doses we might be doing from a weekly to monthly base, so we're not accumulating too much fatigue. So they're the general basis of when it comes to plyometrics. If I were to build a beginner structure for people, start them off with building some form of capacity through extensive plyometrics, through doing little hops, little jumps and stuff like that. Once we know we can tolerate the loading through that, I might include a little bit more intent with it. So we might do a little bit more reactive things like jumps, box jumps, depth jumps, where we're managing that kind of intent, but we're still exposing them to creating higher forces. From there, I'm going to change the direction that we're going to go. We're going to maybe go with horizontal jumps. We go with diagonal jumps, backwards jumps. Again, as you can see from there, the progression is naturally increasing the intensity and the demand that the body will be taking on. And then from there, we might add a few things in there. We might add some in like single leg plyometrics, where we're really trying to maximize the intent, the distance, the height that we're trying to do. But as we're going along from here, we're first of all going to be building up that volume. And then as we start getting more into the intensity stuff, we're going to start dropping that volume as well. So to the point where we can see benefits, but we're not creating so much fatigue that we can't recover from. And if you want to know how to know that you are making progress with these plyometrics, you could add things in like a measuring point. So for example, if you're doing broad jumps, if you've got something to measure a jump in mind, you can test the distance of there as well. If you've got a vertical jump test where you've got, obviously it's the springs around it, we can jump to see how high you jump with that, so we can see those level improvements. Now, are plyometrics just for athletes? No, I get a lot of my Gen Pop clients doing them as well, and the reason for them is being able to organize your body when you're trying to produce a force really quickly and absorb force really is something that we do on a regular basis. If we're reacting to something that simple as like a jar just jumping out of a cupboard, I know it's a random example, but let's just go with it, and you're able to catch that quickly. Like, it's being able to build that awareness to where your limbs are in space. And I think that from someone who's just getting into sports to maybe someone who's a little bit in the older side as well, I think that's such an important thing as well. And not only that as well, like, it makes you a better athlete or a better lifter. Like, understand, like, building that awareness of where your limbs are in space really can develop you as a lifter as well, because you can know where to put load as well. You are able to tolerance more load as well. Because if we think about natural strength training as a whole, yes, it's high forces, but it's over longer durations than we normally would get through plyometrics. And then obviously the most important stuff, which obviously I don't wish on anyone, but if in the case, for example, we've got someone who maybe falls over, they're able to tape that landing, they're able to get themselves back up, which again, super, super important for anyone really. So before I kind of like tail off this podcast episode now, guys, I'll give you some kind of like simple like tips that you can kind of follow. When to do them in a workout. Do them early in a workout. Obviously, like I said, they're highly coordinated. They require a lot of skill, a lot of demand. Put them in part of your warm-up. Put them as part of a primer before your strength work, because you need to stay fresh. You need to be making sure that your nervous system feels good for it as well. We obviously want quality out of them as well, and we don't want tiredom. Which obviously leads into the next one as well. If the quality drops, bitter. Like, when it comes to the extensive stuff as well, there's a little bit of a nuance with that as well. But for definitely the more intensive stuff, we want to be making sure that these are good quality reps as well. And we're starting noticing that fatigue is starting to drop in as well, which I might actually add right now. Actually, like, vertical jump is a really good example of how readiness you are. If you do a vertical jump and you start noticing that your jumps are starting to drop over the weeks, that's a really good actually metric to use when it comes to fatigue. Better back in today as well. So obviously, yes, if the quality starts to drop there, guys, bin them. There's no point doing them. Then the second one is keep repetitions low. Build the volume up with these as well. As you start to get more into the intensive stuff as well, keep the volume a little bit there. Maybe 3 to 4 repetitions as well. Good. You'll be surprised at keeping the volume low and having only a good couple of sets of doing these, how far you'll actually go with these and how much better you will be tolerance. I think any athlete that includes these into the off season, going into the pre-season as well, when the pre-season volume really hits, you'll be quite surprised how quickly you can adapt to that. And especially when it comes to in-season, we all should know by now that the quicker we can get these in place and the more force we can get you to tolerate, the better season you'll have. And it reduces things like injury rates as well. It will make you stronger throughout the season as well, which will really make you important as the season goes on. Now, this next one has a little bit of nuance in there as well. But you could generally say progress direction before adding height into it as well. Again, that's not a set in stone rule, but it's something that I quite like using. Like, I like to, if I'm getting someone to jump as well, I will introduce them to more things like direction before I start adding intent into it. So that's something to kind of think out as well. And that's it there, guys. Obviously, plyometrics. If you see my Instagram, if you see my social media, my style of training, I'm doing plyometrics in pretty much all of my training sessions. And I've not really covered it as much in this one, but plyometrics are not just sets of ways of just lower body. You can do upper body plyometrics as well. You can do ballistic type of works of plyometrics, and those rules that I've gave you guys throughout the training, throughout this episode of the podcast, you can apply into that as well. But like I said to you, like you guys before, like the quicker you guys apply this into your training and start off with them extensive plyometrics and little hops, the quicker you'll see those kind of results. And I think it'll be so important to include them into your training. But anyway, guys, thank you very much to listening to this episode of the MH Performance Podcast. I'll see you all in the next one.